We've got the wonderful distinction as being the panel that gets to focus on now what. And I hope what you've experienced is that the conversation is built throughout the day, and we can hope to continue that through the evening. But again, my name is Milton Reynolds, and I have the pleasure for working for an organization called Facing History in Ourselves, which is an international organization, although we have 5 offices nationally, as well as 1 in Toronto, 1 in London, and 1 in Cape Town. And we work around comparative genocide history, or hard histories, but one of my primary interests of intellectual focus is really the history of eugenics. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm here today. I want to just give a quick shout out to the teachers I work with, many of whom are here in the audience today, because I think it is through them that we can begin to imagine new kinds of conversations and creating perhaps a response movement to some of the troubling trends that we see. So if you are either a teacher who works with Facing History or a student who's in a Facing History class, I'd encourage you to raise your hands. All right. And then the other thing I want to do is just, if you're a scholar or an activist who is engaged with one of our Facing History teachers or been in one of the classrooms, I'd also like for you to raise your hands. All right. So maybe we can think about this really as about movement building work. But I'm going to introduce my panelists, and I'm going to give a few brief remarks, and then we're going to sort of move through the panel. So to my right, I have Patty Berne. So Patty Berne is the co-founder and director of Sins Invalid, a performance project on disability and sexuality. Hailing from San Francisco, Patty's background includes advocacy for immigrants who seek asylum due to war and torture, community organizing within the Haitian diaspora, international support for the Guatemalan democratic movement, work with incarcerated youth towards alternatives to the criminal legal system, advocating for the LGBTQI community, and disability rights perspectives within the fields of reproductive and genetic technologies, offering mental health support to survivors of violence, and cultural activism to centralize marginalized voices, particularly those of people with disabilities. Patty's training in psychology focused on trauma and healing for survivors of interpersonal and state-sponsored violence. Her work can be seen at www.sinsinvalid.org. Welcome, Patty. Sounds like you've been busy. To my left, one of the teachers I work with and really a colleague is Kate Wiley. Kate has taught and coached in Bay Area private schools, both parochial and independent, for the past 15 years. She is currently the Dean of Students and a history teacher at Wolbring High School. Kate received her MA in U.S. History and Women's Studies at San Francisco State and was a former student of Paul Longmore. Kate currently teaches 2 seminar history courses, one examining the years between the wars, in which there is a sizable unit dedicated to the study of eugenics in America, premised on the work of Facing History in Ourselves. The other, Race, Class, and Gender, a course that also uses many of the resources and materials from Facing History as an organization. So welcome, Kate.
Thanks, Mel.
And then last but certainly not least, we will be joined by Skype by Dr. Gregor Wolbring. Dr. Wolbring is an ability studies and disability studies scholar, biochemist, and activist. He is based at the University of Calgary. He has been based at the University of Calgary for 21 years, where he's an associate professor in the Faculty of Medicine, Department of Community Health Services, Community Rehabilitation and Disability Studies. He has various academic appointments, such as visiting professor of ability expectation and ableism studies, American University on Sovereign Nations, USA and affiliated scholar, Center for Nanotechnology and Societies at Arizona State University. He's also a fellow at the Institute for Science, Policy, and Society at the University of Ottawa in Canada. He was also the president of Canada's Disability Studies Association and is a board member of the Society for Disability Studies. More about him can be found at his website, which is listed, I believe, in the program, and we'll make sure you have the link. It's probably too long for me to read out and you to copy. His research interests include ability expectations and ableism, ethics and governance, disability studies, social, ethical, legal, economic, environmental, cultural governance issues of new and emerging and converging science and technologies, such as nanoscale, S&T, molecular manufacturing, aging, longevity, and immorality research, cognitive sciences, and much more. And so we will hear from him towards the tail end of our panel as he joins us via Skype. So welcome, Gregor. So as we think about this question of what can be done as we're building today's conversation, I'd like to first start by a challenge, but it's one that's been sort of referenced throughout the day, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. But one of the challenges I do think we confront as a community is this one of historical knowledge. Many still today are unaware of the history of eugenics, and I still find that when people do surface this history, it's often in the context of Nazi Germany. Now that's an important connection for people to recognize and to understand, but sometimes I believe that solid connection to the history of Nazi Germany can create both conceptual impediments in terms of how we understand the history, but I would also sort of argue some affective barriers or affective complications, as it's hard to imagine that the US and other societies have engaged in some of those atrocities that we would typically associate with Nazism, when in fact these ideas are more normal and routine than history, or at least many people's knowledge of history would suggest. But I also think that this challenge also presents a great opportunity for us. And one is to really leverage some of the structures that were used to put some of these ideas in place, which are schools, right? If we think about how this narrative was constructed, we have to go back and look at the role of education, not just in the US, not just in Germany, but I would argue most of the societies that engaged with eugenics, schools played a very important part in disseminating and promulgating those ideas. And so we should reimagine those structures as places of intervention and response. And so I think that's an important opportunity. I think in particular, we're in an exciting place here in California. As someone alluded to earlier, in 2011, there was a passage of the Fair Education Act. So that's Fair, Inclusive, Fair, Accurate, Inclusive, and Respectful Education Act, which is a K-12 mandate, which requires a teaching of a history of the LGBT community, the disability community, and other underrepresented groups. And so it is an opportunity to reimagine, again, the classroom as a place where we begin to complicate our thinking in these narratives. I would also propose, as many people have today, that it's also a great opportunity to begin to think about intersectionalities and begin to talk across the silos that sometimes stifle our civic imagination in terms of how we might engage with these issues and create a more robust, coordinated, and effective response community. Let me see. I think lastly, leveraging some new frames which allow us to ask different sorts of questions. Some of these frames are emerging. We're going to hear some of them. Actually, Dr. Wolbring is going to suggest some of them, and we also heard some earlier today. But I also think it's important to sort of think about these new frames as in some ways as being legacies of the work that's been done before. As new opportunities are created and new voices enter the academy, they come with different perspectives because in many cases they're coming from different experiences. So the questions that animate their inquiry provide us new opportunities to think again about these histories and to pose new questions, and more importantly to connect those questions of the past to how they're resurfacing and being repackaged today. In the last conversation we had sort of had this idea that all societies, all moments in society grapple with this idea that the tragedies and travesties of today are normalized in such a way that they just become the things that we're doing. And yet in hindsight, when we look back, we see that there were some pretty tremendous things taking place. And so it's a tension that I think we all have to grapple with, and yet it's a great opportunity, again, to, as I suggest, begin to complicate our thinking about this. So with that said, I'm actually about to hand this over, but I will say one more thing. One other frame that I think is really useful and has proven generative in our work is actually thinking about the process of transitional justice, which are the processes through which societies go to recover after episodes of genocide or collective violence. Some of the tools that they use to reimagine society are educational reform, institutional reform, cultural responses, which can include artistic responses and a variety of things that provoke conscious memory, judicial responses, reconciliation processes, both formal and informal, restitution and reparations, and lastly, truth commissions. I think in this last panel, we'll be touching on various different elements of that, and so I sort of just throw that out as a frame that we might think about and use together as a community to animate discussions about how do we confront not just the legacies of the past, but their resurfacing and reemergence in the present. So with that said, I'm going to hand it over to Patty.
Great. I have a pretty soft voice, so I want to make sure people can hear me. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, the mic's close to me. Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Milton. I'm so excited to be here, I have to say, because it's great to see colleagues that I've worked with before and friends, and it's such a rare opportunity to actually engage in exactly these intersections. And like everyone has said, you know, next time maybe 2 days, 3 days, whatever our budgets can afford, because there's so much content. And I want to acknowledge that part of what I think encouraged me to initiate the Sins and Valid Performance Project was my experience working at the Center for Genetics and Society, where I directed the project on disability, race, and eugenics. We started in 2006, and as a disability justice performance project, we certainly, you know, are a majority queer, majority person of color project, looking at disability within a broader social justice context, not just theoretically, but also in terms of organizational practices, how we understand movement building, who we make alliances with, et cetera. And, you know, we're doing some work, for example, currently with the Brown Boy Project, looking at the relationship between gender justice and disability justice. And so it's, you know, the work, the flagship work that we started with was the Performance Project. At this point, we're also doing quite a bit of movement building work as well. And so if folks are interested in that, please feel free to look us up on the website, sinsandvalid.org. And I wanted to circle back. When I was working at CGS, which was an awesome place to be, as a person that was kind of identified as in many of the eugenic crosshairs, it was intense to be experiencing so many narratives of why I personally should not exist. That's depressing. And I saw that with the responses that, you know, when part of my responsibilities were to engage folks, and I saw people with this idea of like, well, and now what? Because, you know, these are historical forces as well as current policies, and the idea of cultural work started incubating at that point, because that is something, if we can't engage our political imagination, then we certainly aren't going to have any policies that reflect something that's liberatory. So I started thinking a lot about the role of cultural work in movement building. I mean, I had obviously before, but specifically around this this work. And so many times when we work with artists, we you know, we talk about essentially what is motivating and inspiring their work, but also we're constantly engaging with what are the histories in which we're embodying our sexualities, and there's no way to talk about embodying our sexualities as disabled people of color without talking about eugenic violence that our communities have experienced. So, you know, pictures speak louder than words. And so we have actually an excerpt from the 2011 performance. And part of it is in the film, which I encourage people to, we're in the middle of moving offices, so there's no copies here, sorry. But people can contact us or me for those, or for more information in general. But I want to show a little bit about SINS, and I should give a little bit of context. These are excerpts, so there's more in each piece, and each piece does have an overall arch. Not each piece, each performance does have an overall arch. And this is part of the opening and part of the closing or closing pieces.
that photo has long been removed from my desktop, and every time I'm doing something, it shows up only when I'm connected to this. So
I love it.
I apologize. Oh,
There you go.
Oh, God. Apologize for. That's an adorable baby.
1914, Harry Laughlin from the Eugenics Record Office categorized the 5 Ds of those who should not reproduce.
Degenerate,
Dependent,
deficient,
delinquent,
defective,
Eugenics was both a social movement and state policies in which ideology and science combined to selectively breed the human population. In the United States, 27 states had eugenic sterilization laws. By 1924, the state of Virginia had a draft Eugenic Sterilization Act, which called for sterilizations directed at giving the doctors at the colony the legal backing they needed for sterilizing patients. Colony officials decided to test whether the Sterilization Act was constitutional and selected a young woman from the colony as the test case, Carrie Buck.
My name is Carrie. My mom lived in that colony there. So I lived with the Dobbses, my foster parents, since I was little. They treated me all right. I tried to help out around the house and such. I was sweet on Mr. Dobbs' nephew. I don't want to say his name, though. He raped me. And then the Dobbses got mad. Not at him, at me, because I was pregnant. They started telling people that I acted up, that I wasn't right in the head. They said they didn't want me there anymore. They sent me to the colony.
The case eventually wound up in the United States Supreme Court, which decided in 1927 in an 8-1 vote to uphold the Virginia decision to sterilize Carrie. The majority opinion in the case was written by Oliver Wendell Holmes and included the famous statement, 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. 60,000 sterilizations are documented to have been performed in the United States from 1910 to 1970. Scores of additional sterilizations have occurred, but have not been documented.
Open up. Make room. Let the circle grow. From the shadows steps a man of Tuskegee, syphilis raging untreated through his veins, gone blind, lame, and speechless, while white doctors took notes. But here he speaks with a voice like a drum. At the light's edge, a girl with no face, who lived 10 years locked in a room, holds the hand of an old man with no relatives, and blue numbers tattooed on his arm. Trace the lines in the maps of our bodies. They run like furrows, side by side. They move like rivers, enter each other, make tributaries and forks. Make room for the children raised on locked wards under a flickering fluorescent light, the shocked and injected, the measured and displayed, tormented, fondled, drugged, called defective. Their small, blunt faces look out from sterile hallways, gray buildings, medical case files, toward this fire that we become. They come wheeling and hobbling over thick tree roots to sit by the flames, cry out in childish voices for water, for hands to hold, for us to listen as they give themselves new names. We unwrap our tongues. We bind our stories. We choose to be naked. We show our markings. We lick our fingers. We stroke our bellies. We laugh at midnight. We change the ending. We begin and begin again.
So, thanks. So one of the amazing things about cultural work is we can metabolize things, not just through our overt language, but through our bodies and through the images and memories and collectively as an audience when we're watching things. And what we found is that kind of complex social and political forces and personal histories, hopes and dreams, as well as the way that we move through trauma as individuals or collectively, all of that can be metabolized in a much more, I don't want to say easy, it's not easy, but more effectively, in much more of a transformative way. And when we address things that are as difficult as forced sterilization of people with disabilities or individual, assaults, or broader histories of colonization and how those have eugenic reflections. Again, as a large group and as people that can then, if we can move the arc from that kind of pain through where we move to more celebratory stories of resistance and collective action and personal healing, the audience moves in a way that I've never seen outside of a church. It's pretty awesome. And we have always people coming to us after the shows saying they are survivors of both personal acts of violence as well as institutional violence, including people who are survivors of forced sterilization or family members who are, et cetera. And that's amazing feedback for us, that they walked out differently and in a way feeling more whole than they had prior. And also, because of that, we try to hold this process responsibly by having counselors on site. We typically work with San Francisco Women Against Rape, and we have a table there for counseling. And we also give trigger warnings if there are, because there's a lot of provocative content. That's not just about, that's not so overt as to its healing nature. And I say that because there's a fair amount of SM content, because it is a project on disability and sexuality. And the SM content is definitely a reflection of healing labor, but not for everyone all the time. So we definitely have trigger warnings if there's something that's provocative in a current moment, which is why we have SF4 there specifically. But the counselors from SF4, they've all been trained, because I've trained them, on eugenic frameworks as well, and are competent to engage around it. I would love to talk with how this kind of content can be folded more into the work that we're doing, because we can experience both the difficulty and not just in our cognitive, tracks, but in our visceral experiences. But we can also experience the transformative possibilities more viscerally as well, and that's where it has to be, right? Like, regardless of what policies change, if the social context, if our lived experience as a whole people doesn't change, then the policies are useless. So anyway, this is kind of the work that we're doing at Sins Invalid. Sorry, I have really bad cotton mouth. I started a new medication, and it makes my tongue weird. All right, so I think I'd like to pass it then.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Patty. Now we're going to hear from Kate Wiley.
It's getting a lot of airtime. It's really out of control. So I'm used to, is this on?
No, I think it might have to.
Is that on? Yeah.
There you go.
I'm used to standing with high school teaching, so I need to stand and move a little bit. I just would like to say first that Paul Longmore was one of my master's exam professors, and he was the one who encouraged me to go into high school teaching. So it's very sweet that I'm back here about 15 plus, maybe no, more like 20 years later. So I just wanted to say that. So my name is Kate Wiley, and I work at a high school about 3 minutes from here, across the street from San Francisco City College. And I just want to talk a little bit about the education piece that Milton sort of introduced us to, and a little bit of the work that I've been doing with my classes. I do want to preface this by saying a few things. It's really kind of odd for me to sort of be up here. It feels like it's really the work of my students. I didn't really plan on a lot of what happening. So, and a lot of it was because I wasn't actually sure about the content of my class, which for teachers really can be risky, but this really is the work of my students. It's not mine, so I want to acknowledge that. I just happened to create a structure. They found sort of the rich material. And then the second thing I want to say is I also work at a school that is quite privileged, and I get to decide what I want to teach on any given day. And so I can make up classes that sound great to me, and my school says go ahead and teach it. So I also want to acknowledge that actually being able to do this work came from a place of privilege. And that is that I get to pick what I teach at an independent school. I'm not bound by state law. So I think that that's important to say. Okay, so how I sort of came to this work, the school where I work, we teach senior seminar classes in our history department. I was the former chair of the history department. And you can decide what you want to teach. And so about 3.5 years ago, I decided I wanted to teach a class on the years between the world wars, because I really liked it. And I really wanted a larger forum to teach the rape of Nanking. And I wanted to look at the modern story of the Middle East as rooted in the decision-making of the Treaty of Versailles and the Treaty of Sèvres. And I thought this sounds like a great class. My understanding of eugenics was connected to Nazi Germany, and that was the extent of it. I happened upon Milton's seminar at Facing History in the summer of 2011, where I was exposed to the Race and Membership book, and you have a flyer about that, I know, in your packet. And I learned much more about the eugenics movement in the United States. You know, I was one of those who was sort of like Margaret Sanger, birth control movement, and Jane Addams and the hygiene, as when I taught U.S. history. And then you dig deeper and you learn a little bit more. And so this became sort of a really a keystone, really, of that class, which I'm still currently teaching. And again, it was one of those things where I still didn't feel like I knew a lot about it. And so I was sort of learning as I was teaching the class. And again, you give students an inch and they'll take a mile, but in really great ways too, not just in the purported sort of negative disciplinary ways. So what I did that first year was I created a debate series and for the students to do, and one was on the SAT. because I wanted them to look at modern legacies of early eugenics, and so testing being one of them. And then the second was on genetic prenatal testing. And what I found was that structuring a debate for students on topics like these was actually intensely problematic, because it teaches them that there's a right answer to that, and that someone wins the debate. And so then there you go, like done, we've sort of sorted it out. The project itself, they got into a lot of research and it was great, but I think it was a sort of a poor choice on my part to structure it that way that first year. So I was sort of learning as I went. I decided to teach the class the second year, and which was the fall of 2012. And I kind of shifted some things around, and what I decided that year was that I actually wanted the students to produce a website, and a lot of that was based on a lot of the Facing History curriculum and sort of what they were learning. So this is what they produced, and what I asked them to do was to sort of consider a lot of the through lines that Milton's talking about. So not only the story and the history, because you know, one of the things that I've learned with teaching high school students, especially in the history department, we lay a lot of stuff on them. And then they say, okay, I got the story, what do you want me to do with it? And we don't actually ask them to do anything with it in high school. We sort of say, you know, understand the history of slavery and understand oppression and understand hierarchy and power. And then we say, go and change the world. But there's not a lot of like in between with that. And so one of the things I asked them to consider, which Milton talked about, if I scroll down, scroll down, reverse increase maybe? Oh, there it goes. So they looked at what Milton talked about with sort of examples of transitional justice around the world, with sort of other shameful acts. I don't know if it'll pull it up. So they looked at Rwandan genocide, they looked certainly at the Holocaust, and they looked at other forms of commemoration that other societies have used to sort of redress parts of their history. If I go back. And so from that, I asked them to come up with their own commemoration for the history of sterilization in the state of California, and what they thought would be, to their mindset, the sort of most appropriate way for California. And they knew a little bit about sort of the governor's apologies from previous years and whatnot. So this is what they actually came up with. And so this was sort of a graded project, putting this website together. I asked them to present it to a bunch of different groups, including Milton, so to kind of present their work. And then a group of them decided they wanted to do more with it. And so one of the things I've also learned about teaching this history is it taps into a lot of things that students at 18 years old already feel. A huge sense of social justice. Wanting to make their learning public, and frankly having it be more about their teacher. And they're also at an age where they really want to fit in, and that whole concept of being fit, and who gets to fit, and who gets to sit in the cool section of the cafeteria and who doesn't, and who sets those norms, and how do you know that they exist. A lot of that, this story taps into where they're kind of living. So they decided they wanted to make it public. So what they did, I think it's this one. Nope. There it is. Yeah. The students submitted their proposal to change.org, which is this past January, which is a social activist site. It's a little bit of a slow slog, as you can see. We only have 250 supporters, and it's been up for 8 months. What's great about this, like if I look at Jonathan Chernogers, he's at Cal right now. Their work lives beyond the four walls of the high school classroom, and frankly beyond their tenure in high school. And I think there's something special about that for students. So they've made their learning public. This may be it, right? That might be where it ends and they get 250. That wasn't the learning for them. That wasn't, I mean, it would be ideal to get 5,000. But I mean, that wasn't the essence of the learning for them. Now you can still sign it. It's a shameless plug that you can still sign the petition. So they used. Scroll down here. They used the FAIR Act as their rationale for why. So their proposal is to include it in the California state history textbooks. That the story of eugenics, the sterilization, the state of California deserves to be in those textbooks. So they drafted this proposal. If it hits that number, it goes to the governor and the State Board of Education. So that was last year, and so this year I've decided that my class currently, we're actually just beginning our eugenics unit right now, they're gonna write the curriculum. So they're going to study textbooks, they're going to study old biology and history textbooks and look at how aspects of this were treated then. And then they're actually going to craft a whole chapter to teach the history. And again, whether that goes anywhere or not, I don't know. We've got a contact person with the State Board of Education, so we're hoping. But I kind of think of it as sort of the, I guess for me, the what, the so what, and the now what. And sort of for me as a teacher too, I think it's important to leave people with a few takeaways. So if I guess I can say any takeaways is that if there's any way to structure assessments that it's subjective, they're hard to grade, and they're really subjective. But if there's any way where really the kids are determining the trajectory of it, and any way to make it public, even if it's not about your class, even if the grading period has ended, it's where sort of the intrinsic motivation for learning comes. And I didn't know that as somebody who used to love tests. I didn't know that until I sort of got into this predicament of I didn't really know a lot of the curriculum of these years, and had to sort of wing it. And it produced actually really wonderful things. So thanks.
Thank you, Kate.
Oh.
So now we're going to leverage the magic of technology in this case and bring in Dr. Gregor Wolbring from Calgary. So will give us just a moment of transition.
Only fair, you should also have to see my photo.
All right, so welcome, Gregor.
Hello.
That's so good.
Welcome.
Okay. Okay, so you want me to start?
That would be great.
Yeah, but Gregor, we can see all but your chin.
Well, who needs my chin? It's just, now you see all the gray. I tried to hide that. Okay, now let's see. Do the people have a handout from my PowerPoint?
No. But I'll send it around.
Okay.
Hold on, I'm
And-
labeling your face, Gregor. Which way should I move?
That looks good.
Okay. Okay, then I start. And I assume it's no PowerPoint on the screen, right?
That's correct.
Correct.
So I just have to rely on that you all look at whatever computer you have and whatever handout. So first I would like to thank the organizers, of course, for getting me in by Skype, as travel becomes so problematic nowadays. I mean, we just had the Los Angeles thing again. All right, so my talk is really about ableism as a conceptual framework to address the history, present, and future of eugenics. And I will show that ableism is not just there to question eugenics, but ableism can be used actually as a construction, as a tool, as a positive tool to simply bring out a different narrative which might limit the use of eugenics. Now, in my second slide, I normally introduce my students, and if you have the handout, you see that. They have a nice logo, they have a nice, like a wolf, and then it says underneath the Wolpack. They came up with the name, and it's an interdisciplinary research team of students from first year undergraduates all the way to PhD students. Half of them are supervised by me, and over time more and more students join, so by now half of them are actually supervised by different PIs, but they are simply with the group for the peer experience and simply to exchange stuff and to learn and to collaborate. The PIs are not necessarily part of it, it's just the students. I have one other one with it, Jesse Hendricks, who is the second PI, joined the group. Then slide 3 you have is in essence the list. We are 16 people by now, and you see a lot of pictures which are all smiling people. And now let's go to the talk, right? And for that I first have to set a little bit the stage with what I understand eugenics is. And you will find that in a paper Natalie Ball, one of the team, published in the beginning of this year. So eugenics is the investigation under which men of a high type are produced. That is an original definition from 1883 from Galton. Another one from 1904, also Galton, is to bring as many influences as can be reasonably employed to cause the useful classes in the community to contribute more than their proportions to the next generation. Now, this vision of eugenics is broad and extends far beyond segregation and sexual sterilization, which are the two practices we often talk about, especially around the history of eugenics. Now then we have two different versions of eugenics. We talk mostly about negative eugenics because, again, history is mostly sterilization and so on. Or even when we look at talking today about genetic testing, and it's mostly negative eugenics. Right? But we have also something called positive eugenics, which is aimed at increasing the number of desired phenotypic or genotypic traits within a population. That's the 1917 definition. Traditionally, positive eugenics was achieved by encouraging those with desirable
He provided this just in case.
Traditionally, positive eugenics was achieved by encouraging those with desirable traits to reproduce with one another. In the future, positive eugenics might be achieved through the synthesis of...
We'll try to get him back on.
Yes, I said something wrong. I said no.
Gregor, I've got your podcast just in case it goes out again.
Okay.
And would you like me to pull up the PowerPoint? Because I...
No.
Okay.
I mean, we don't have time because who knows how many more seconds we have this. Okay, so positive eugenics, I mean, increasingly in the future would be achieved through synthesis of desired genomes from scratch, synthetic biology, in combination with the artificial womb. That's really the holy grail, right? Because when you do synthetic biology and you generate genomes, you don't know what of this becomes viable. And you can't really use women constantly for that, only then to have, I mean, spontaneous termination of their pregnancies. So you use artificial womb, and then if it doesn't, I mean, become viable, no big deal, right? You just throw it out. Because many genes are impacted by environmental factors, elimination of environmental factors that impact genes negatively also can be seen as fitting with the aim of positive eugenics, and that gets back to the definition of Galton. So positive eugenics is actually going far beyond what we normally talk about. And it's the same thing with negative eugenics. So far, the history was sterilization. The future will be really about gene therapy, right, and somatic or germinal gene therapy. So we intervene more, right, to try to eliminate negative pieces. And so then my conclusion from that, which is in the paper with Natalie Vogt, given Galton's understanding of eugenics, eugenic goals are not bound to the past, nor is it required that they only target those we label up to now as having deficiencies. Eugenic thinking can also be applied to enhance humans beyond the norm, or beyond the normal, through, for example, somatic and germinal genetic enhancement. The only prerequisite is that these interventions give an advantage to the beyond the normal enhanced over others, and that this advantage is durable and benefits the stock in the end. And this is really where my area is. I look really at the future and where these, I mean, enhancement and new versions of eugenics. So I do very little in the history, but this piece we had, in essence, looked at the history to the future and looked at arguments. And you will find that selling of human enhancement, we nearly use the same arguments than we used to sell eugenics, the historical part. Now we go to this ability stuff. Ability expectations are one driver for eugenic practices. The ability expectation, or here for the time being, the term ableism, was coined within the disability rights movement in the 1960s and 70s. And it was really coined to be used similar to sexism, racism. In this case, it was to highlight the obsession of the leg people with their legs and the lack of willingness to accommodate the ones without legs, just to use legs as an example. But in essence, any body deviation was in essence seen as problematic. And so that's then ableism was coined to show the obsession with certain body-related ability expectations, and then the disablement which comes with it, the lack of accommodation. Right? And body-linked ability expectations were, of course, one avenue to promote and justify eugenics, right? Burden, cost too much, and so on. We can use all kind of stuff. However, ableism goes beyond body ability expectations. Ableism is very likely one of the most socially entrenched and accepted isms, and one of the biggest enablers for other isms, like sexism, right? We know that step 1, rationality is important. Step 2, women are irrational. Step 3, you can't vote, right? That was, of course, an argument used with when the suffragette movement tried to get women the right to vote. That was exactly the reasoning, right? Men came first up with an arbitrary ability they found important. Then they came up arbitrarily that men have rationality and women don't. And then the conclusion was, therefore, women can't do certain things, right? Racism, we do this around cognition. We like the bell curve, again, the senior citizens in the room, like me, I mean, very likely know the book Bell Curve, where it really is saying, well, some ethnic groups are more intellectually cognitive able than others. And James Watson, right, the hero of the biotech movement, I lost his job in Cold Springs Harbor because they used one too often the argument that certain ethnic groups have less abilities, cognitive abilities than other ethnic groups. And then you can use for casteism, ageism. Right, there was a time when we cherished the elderly because they were a pool of wisdom. Now, of course, we have Google, and the elderly are just a research allocation problem. Right? And we can go on. We can talk about speciesism. Right? We say, well, I mean, animals are not cognitive able, therefore we can eat them. And therefore, of course, it comes as a rebuttal. Okay, so we try to develop, I mean, animal enhancement so they become sentient. So because once they're cognitive able, then we can't eat them anymore. Right, and then we can go on with environmentalism, and then we have some abilities which play directly into the eugenics, like productivity and competitiveness. One reason why eugenics around body abilities worked so well, because you use, well, they have to be productive, and if you're not productive, I mean, well, you're just a burden, or you have to be competitive. And of course, we still use productivity, and we still use competitiveness. Right? And that will sell the enhancement, and that make you in the room who do not have the newest upgrade to your eye, of course, so unproductive, so not competitive, and so impaired. And then, of course, I have the new eye and the newest version, and then I become, in essence, the one who is on top. So, ability expectations are simply one aspect of culture used by social entities to relate to each others. When humans relate to this, to ability-based and ability-justified understanding of oneself, right? We have a lot of people who simply can't accept themselves because they don't have certain abilities. One's body, a lot of literature, relationship with others of one species, like other humans, animals, environment, right? Countries also do that, right? Countries that have a high GDP seem themselves to a better able for their population than others. So this judgment is constantly there. Right? And I would say, also it's used often negatively. We could, for example, put, and that's I want you really to take home, we use ableism in a positive way, saying we really want a social structure which is equitable. Right, for example, and they say, this is my ability expectation of my fellow human beings. And that would, for example, say goodbye to eugenics, because I can't see eugenics equitable short of that we get rid of everyone. Well, that would be equitable, right? So, and that also means that you, right, you can really look into ability expectation and how they relate to each other. Some are reinforcing, we have certain ability expectation which will reinforce the equity ability expectation. Others which are, I would say, are detrimental to it, like competitiveness, and others who might be neutral, like whether you have black hair or green hair, does not do anything to the competitiveness expectation, right? So there's a lot of dynamics, and this was developed by the disability community, this whole ableism thing, and it was used by no one, because it comes out of the disability community, and people say, well, it has no implication for anyone else but the ones without legs. Right? And of course, this is actually the holy grail of academic and new angles, where you can go to any field because it hasn't been done yet, and you can get many publications because it's all new and no one did this. And where are the, right? And where are the sociologists picking up on the ableism and so on, or the anthropologist or whoever? None of them. If this would have been used by the women's movement, we would have had for decades people crawling all over the ableism concept. But lucky me, no one, right, it came from the disability community and no one ever worked on it, more or less, besides some disabled weird people. And so, I mean, I can write all I want and it's all new. So the ones who actually get the point are the gaming industry. And there was a game called Deus Ex Invisible War, really cool game. And there's a discourse in there, conversation between Alex D and Paul Denton. And it goes like that. Paul Denton, if you want to even out the social order, you have to change the nature of power itself, right? Question mark. And what creates power? Question mark. Wealth, physical strength, legislation, maybe. But none of those is the root principle of power. Alex D, I'm listening. Paul Denton, ability is the ideal that drives the modern state. It's a synonym for one's worth, one's social reach, one's election in the biblical sense, and it's the ideal that needs to be changed if people are to begin living as equals. I don't know, I mean, right, it's just, it could be me who has written that. Alex D, and you think you can equalize humanity with biomodification? Paul Denton, the commodification of ability, tuition, of course, but increasingly genetic treatment, cybernetic protocols, now biomods, has had the side effect of creating a self-perpetuating aristocracy in all advanced societies. When ability becomes a public resource, what will distinguish people will be what they do with it, intention, dedication, integrity, the qualities we would choose as a bedrock of the social order. I mean, I could have just given you that slide and not have given any other talk. I mean, it's all self-evident. And with Star Trek, we know, right, humans have very bad ability expectation, how they played themselves out, till the Vulcans came down and first contact happened, and then humans started to behave. No Trekkie in the room, I think it's so sad. Yes, I'm done. So, okay, so in essence, my conclusion is to deal with eugenics, one has to deal with ability expectations that support eugenics, negative form of ableism. One has to push for a set of ability expectations, such as equity, that are irreconcilable with eugenic thinking, positive use of ableism. And now if you have the handout, you see a little dog with a cup, which is also, I mean, has also the logo of the dog on it, and that's my group. So your questions.
All right. So thank you, Gregor. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to move into some table discussions, and then we're going to pull back in, and then we'll have an opportunity to respond to their conversations in about 40 minutes or so. So I'm going to give folks directions, and then we'll move to our table discussion. And so in the spirit of sort of harvesting those nuggets and goodies that you've been procuring at your tables, I'd love to hear from some folks and some of the sort of the gems that have surfaced in your conversations at the tables. Questions, comments, thoughts? Raise your hand and I'll Montel my way over and we'll get the conversation started.
We've been talking a lot about ableism, opportunity, good learning environments. Do we want a safe learning environment or do we want an effective learning environment, and can we have both? And I think, that the whole thing about triggers, I think, was one of the things that catalyzed that discussion for us. And so, the dynamic between opportunity and danger and safe spaces and comfort zones, I think, is something that we're all looking at in terms of our teaching.
That's a great start. Move on over. To you next.
We talked a lot about education, not so much awareness, but education on eugenics in general and what it is. There was a couple of us, including me, that didn't even understand or know what eugenics was until today. And in the work that I've been doing with corporations and stuff like that and teaching them how to include people with disabilities, I've learned and been told that it's really difficult to get different groups together for diversity initiatives, to learn about Black History Month or Disability Awareness Employment Month. And eugenics, to me, seems to be a common denominator for all of these different things that we want to correct or we want to do better at, because it encompasses all these sore spots in the society that this public perception has, and understanding where we came from, what the root cause analysis is for where we're moving towards as a society, and why we want to eliminate these things, I think is really important to start learning at an early age, and I'm really glad that the high school students are championing that. And I think that you guys should go before the State Rehabilitation Council in California, and I think that you should go up to Sacramento and really push that, because that's going to be really awesome, and that's the best way to start moving forward in the direction that we want to go. Again, it's not about solving problems, it's about creating what we want to achieve, and I think that's awesome.
No, we discussed a number of things over the break, and we started off talking about intersectionality and sort of the question of how do you teach about intersectionality, do you get people to understand that at different levels and in different contexts. We talked about the power of personal narratives and about how they can be very important to social change, and how do we make these personal narratives part of a broader conversation, and how do we use that broader conversation to affect policy changes. And I think that's an interesting question. And so we talked about the history of eugenics in California, and how things like documentary film or performance art or things like that can be a way to educate people on these issues and help them to see it in a different light. And one other thing that was brought up that I thought was very interesting, and I want to note very briefly, was the concept of transhumanism and kind of neo-eugenics, and how a lot of people think that we should be trying to improve humanity according to a utopian vision that may be problematic for a lot of other folks. And what was sort of interesting to me about that being brought up is that perhaps because we have a lack of positive, exciting new visions from a social perspective about how to transform our society, maybe we're more focused on how to transform our bodies individually and collectively, because there's not as much social energy. And so I thought that was interesting and worth mentioning.
That's excellent. Really stoked about that idea.
I'm not going to try to summarize everything we talked about at the table, but one thing that came up a lot today was about cultural damage, and in this last presentation where Patty was talking about cultural work, that definitely came up for us as a really powerful and positive way to address internalized ableism, as well as to kind of deal with some of the feelings of being discouraged and just the heaviness around the topic of eugenics. There was a concern raised, though, about whether some of the cultural work and the performance does include invisible or non-apparent disabilities, and whether people can resonate with that. One other thing that I wanted to mention was we talked about where are these discussions and where is this work happening in the community, and unfortunately I think a lot of us feel like it's not happening a lot, that a lot of disability advocacy groups don't have capacity for it, or aren't doing it for whatever reason. And we started brainstorming a little bit about social media or other things. That obviously there's a lot of people here today from different venues who are really interested in exploring not only how do we think about these ideas, but this last part about what are the implications in our work, whatever our work may be. And so that we have some interest with everyone here in exploring how do we continue that.
Great, thank you. Now I got a request over here. Others, as I think about my next position room, got you.
Our group discussed about the 5 Ds, dependent, delinquent, degenerate, defective, and deficient, and we realized that was a lot of people. That's it.
bounce here and then over.
Hello, thanks for the conference today. I've enjoyed it. I just want to add that, eugenics historically has always presented itself as being based on science, and a lot of that science is still being practiced today, even though the eugenic conclusions don't necessarily flow from it. But actually what the science is actually pseudoscience, because it's based on running in the family, which is not caused by genes necessarily, and twin studies. I mean, those, all of you know, is out there, pervasive in every field. The twin studies show that strong genetic heritability, blah, blah, blah. And this is pseudoscience because twin studies are based on completely false theoretical assumptions that even twin researchers know are false and justify them in incredibly bizarre ways. So that's really a kind of a point that I just wanted to make, that eugenics is based on false premises, false science, fake science, pseudoscience, twin studies, and it's not just wrong, but it's fake science. And so I just wanted to kind of point that out historically. Thanks.
Thank you. Others?
Okay, so a few highlights from our table. There were some points about expression, going forward, what to say, how to say it. So use of humor, use of non-traditional exposition and performance was of great interest here. Connecting scholarship and imaginative writing. There was the idea to consider the structures of education, because if education has been central to eugenics all along, then we need to consider how people are being taught now. And ultimately, Milton thinking really big was talking about, well, where does the movement begin? How does it begin? So at table 14, clearly. There was the idea that it's necessary to explore what Gregor brought up, this idea of exploring the links between ableism and power, between ableism and eugenics, and being more specific about what forms of ableism, what kinds of ability are enshrined. And there was also some discussion about what positive values to offer in response. In other words, what can we say that we stand for, as opposed to simply saying this is inequitable, this is wrong, this is based on fake science, but what are we, what good uses of science do we see? What values do we hold up in counterpoise to those problems that we see? So.
Great, thank you. I know I've got one over here across the room, and I think we'll have time to circle right back to you, Jessica. So I think we can swing these last two. Won't step on your computer, I promise.
So we waxed philosophical in some areas, and we decided that sometimes it's hard to determine who is abled and who is differently abled, because it depends on your perspective. If you're a member of a certain community, for instance, the deaf community, you might feel that you're perfectly abled because you can accommodate the world just fine, and that the people who are not deaf are the ones that are otherly abled, differently abled. So it depends on your perspective, and then that has all sorts of ramifications when you talk about eugenics and choosing whether or not your children would have the same traits as you would have. We also talked about the fact that eugenics, the history of eugenics, is embedded in our language and in our images, and it's really hard to pry that out. And so a good way to start is to simply work on language and references and things, words like moron and idiot, and where those things come from, and retarded, and make sure that that you can incorporate that into classes or into a unit, and the students can do a lot of research that will make them more aware of things. And above all, I think we decided that we have to be comfortable moving forward teaching eugenics without knowing everything about it, that we have to kind of jump in, because it's going to be hard to be an expert before, but we can become more expert as we teach it, and so we just have to put our big boy, big girl pants on and move forward. So.
Great, I think we got time for one more, and then we'll return to the panel to get some responses.
Thank you. Just a quick comment, which is that in the light of trying to understand how this history of eugenics is still, it's not just history, that it's with us now. Another group that has been targeted for involuntary sterilizations is transgender people, and trying to get legal sex change. There's countries that require them to be sterilized. So I just wanted to put that out there as another group that's been targeted.
Great, thank you, appreciate that. So, turning it back to us, the panel, to respond, is there anybody who would like to jump in and address some of those questions more immediately? So I see you're ready to go, Patty, so why don't you kick us off?
I appreciate the last the last remark, because it kind of reflects some of the conversation at the table that I was sitting at, which you know, one, and I don't know, maybe this is ultimately like battle of the frameworks, I don't know, but you know, how eugenics is an overarching framework to address multiple kind of on the ground atrocities, and then it was also brought up at the table, you know, what is the when we're talking about eugenics, like how, you know, because people are unfamiliar with that, with the framework, I mean, with what eugenics, you know, policies or practices even are, even the word, you know, many people haven't heard. And to me, there are larger frameworks that hold eugenic practices and frameworks and that are that hold eugenic practices, which are frameworks of white supremacy and of enforced gender normativity, enforced heteronormativity. And that, you know, and I think that, you know, when we're working with youth, for example, as broad, how do we talk about it with youth? Well, youth may not know the frame of eugenics, but youth certainly know, you know, I mean, people have heard of racism. We can contextualize racism within white supremacy, and we can start from the farthest frame out, and talking about this is one of the methods in which, you know, I mean, and you know, in terms of, you know, and we were talking at the start table about the, you know, the way that, you know, eugenics gets loaded and tied conceptually to Nazi Germany. Well, in fact, if we can expand that out, because if we're talking about, you know, another of the greatest atrocities in this century, you know, the commodification of Africans and the transatlantic slave trade, you know, that was horrifying and recent, and, you know, was another, you know, there are both positive and negative eugenics as a result of that. And so we can tie it to broader frames if we're willing to actually engage with, you know, the truth, in my opinion, that we live within white supremacy, that we live within enforced gender, you know, enforced gender normativity and enforced heteronormativity, as well as ableism. And within those frameworks, then I feel like in the education work that I've done, and, you know, it's a lot easier to talk about eugenics because then it becomes more of a program and method, right? Yeah. Oh,
So,
can I further
yeah.
And someone asked, I think at the back table, just about a specific question about the performance and around if people, is that right, Jessica? Around people with apparent or non-apparent disabilities? Yeah, so yes, it's actually much easier to get people who are willing to perform that don't have non-apparent disabilities, and we have quite a few people, because when you're like myself with an apparent disability, you don't like to be stared at, and you don't want to be on a stage typically. It's taken me years to be comfortable, years. I mean, Marcy can attest, I would be like, on a mic a few years ago, like it's quite difficult. So it's much easier for people that present, oh, my tongue is doing it again, that present normatively to be willing to be on stage. And yes, we do have both people that have apparent, non-apparent, et cetera.
Great. Kate or Gregor, you want to respond to any of those questions?
Okay, yeah, I will. To the question about intersectionality, and I think a lot about that with my students, and for some it may seem like an oversimplification, but I attended a conference a number of years ago called the White Privilege Conference. It's not a celebration of white privilege. It's an acknowledgement of it, in addition to looking at sort of other types of privileges beyond race. And one of the speakers presented in a way that I think is really tangible for students, and so it's the one that I use, and her analogy was sort of the ambulance analogy, and she said there's two cars in an intersection. and in one car is sort of the homophobic person, and in the other car is somebody who's, identifies as LGBT, and there's a car accident. And she says sort of the feminist ambulance drives on by and says, it's not my issue, and the civil rights, African American ambulance drives by and says, it's not my issue. That's a gay issue. And her point was that all of the ambulances should arrive. And that if that happens, then with any types of oppression, you have multiple groups working together. But to sort of teach it as though, this is my issue because I'm a feminist, but those other ones really aren't my sort of activist issues, then you're not getting at intersectionality at all. And then that's where the movements cannot come together. And so it's sort of one of the things I say to my students is like in whatever sort of identifier you have or whatever ambulance you're in, you should always go. And you shouldn't bypass it. So that's how I think about intersectionality.
Great. Gregor, can we pull you into the conversation?
Sure. Well, the short answer is, everyone read Animal Farms, and so segregation never works. And if within the human rights movement someone thinks there are more ahead than others, well, the pigs didn't win in the end. Right? Yeah. So any kind of Animal Farm philosophy does not work, right? It's just reality. And I think the ableism stuff just allows people to get out of the ghetto. And right, I published a piece in 2012 where I said, where I really built ableism around in order to get out of the ghettoization of disability studies, which no one feels relevant because it's only disabled people and it doesn't relate to anyone. Right, and it's really not true. Our stuff is very like the lens which is broadly applicable to any group and any topic, whatever we want. And we see this coming. We have, for example, a move around called ecoability, right, where people trying to link animal rights and nature and disability rights together. So there is stuff. They had just their first conference in New York, and they have a Facebook page. If you just search ecoability, you will find that. So I think there are moves to use, to operationalize more the ability lens in order to bridge all these divides, and to really get away from this Animal Farm, right, obsession we have.
Great, and I don't know that you were able to pick this up, Gregor, but I know that the framework of ableism that you asserted was really a topic of conversation at a number of the tables, so thank you for that contribution.
Well, better be.
All right. So a couple things I was thinking about in hearing the comments. One of the things that sort of caught my mind is this idea of triggers, and I think there's some, I'd like to just make a suggestion of a couple books that I think are really powerful to think about the consequence of being triggered, the consequence of navigating these contingencies that are associated with our ideas, with our identities on a daily basis, right? So Claude Steele's book, Whistling Vivaldi, and Other Ways in Which Stereotypes Affect Us is a really powerful read, and I think it helps us get a sense of the cognitive demands that navigating our identities puts on us in various different ways on a daily basis. And I think, as we begin to think about how do we create safe spaces to learn together, I'd like to plug another book if I can, and that's Identity Safe Classrooms. Places where we can, I don't remember the subtitle, but it's places where we can think and learn together, something like that. That's by Dorothy Steele, so those are two useful pieces that I strongly recommend to most educators. I'll shamelessly plug this book. I brought it up here as a prompt and never sort of showed it, but it's our resource book. It's something that we use. And again, one of the things I'd love to do is be able to take today's work is really a starting point, a call to action for me personally. I think within our organization, these issues around the LGBT community, disability, and quite frankly, gender there are echoes of it in our work, but it's largely underdeveloped. And so it's a really good opportunity to begin to harvest the brain trust that we've created here today and begin to think about how do we include that into those narratives. I think the last thing I'll say, and then we'll sort of maybe push forward into a little bit more conversation, is how do we put the histories in dialogue with each other? And I think it's a really interesting time. I know that Alexandra Ministern's book, Eugenic Nation, was one of the things that kind of flipped my lid and got me, into the rabbit hole of eugenics in the first place. She asserted a framework that I found particularly generative. So now I'm beginning to think across histories, and what's powerful about that is you can see the patterns more distinctly, but also the distinctions. And I think it gives us a better way to understand how to strategically sort of approach these issues. and define where these issues are embedded in institutions and how do institutions replicate them. Because if we can see how the ideas got put into play, we can actually then develop a strategy for how to develop a counter-narrative and how to uproot these things as they live in institutions. And so for me, I think those are really important big ideas and potential next steps. And then how do we create a structure to continue the conversation and to house the knowledge trust so that we can disseminate it more strategically and more effectively. So other thoughts from the panelists in response to some of the questions that were prompted or things you didn't have an opportunity to share that you'd like to? I think we've still got a few moments, about 5 minutes left. Gregor, Kate, Patty, anyone?
Well, I have no book to show. It's very hard to do so. But if you go for all the websites, just Google me and you'll find more than you ever wanted.
Yeah, he did provide some great links, and so we hope to get those to you so you can do some reading about some of the theoretical frames he's proposed today.
And there will be a book chapter, an article coming out hopefully, well, it should be out hopefully within this year in the Journal of Critical Animal Studies, right, which is dealing with ability privilege, where I try to make the linkage, right, between animals and environment and this eco-ableism. I just had a piece out on eco-health where I more or less, dismantled the eco-health movement by being again very, limited in their approaches and so on. So once you start, right, you can apply this ableism lens to nearly everything. It's just very beautiful stuff, and you can use it in class. The thing is, just having an exercise asking the kids the top 10 abilities without limiting just to the body, and ask what they see as important. Right, you will see a diversity of ability expectation, and then have them simply negotiate the conflicts between the different ability expectations. Right, it's easy to do within a classroom to highlight. Because it's mostly these are, internalized things you don't even come up with as an ability. Right, that you have this, expectation that you desperately need to use I ... right, and lining up in front of the stores, right. But once, there's easy to do this exercise to really highlight, for the students, right, how the ability expectation conflicts even within the classroom.
Great. Other sort of closing thoughts?
I'm really, the idea of intersectionality and how do we move that forward that you put out. Milton, it makes me think, unfortunately, that's not the structure of most university settings, right? It's just not, things are siloed necessarily. And, well, not necessarily, but they certainly are siloed. At our table, we were talking about, again, advancing the work, and ultimately when we, to me, any of the work has to be tied to organizing, like sites of actual organizing amongst people, as opposed to only kind of a frameworks war. Within the organizing, community organizing world, kind of social justice, progressive left in the U.S. at least, there's a framework of intersectionality, which is gelling more and more and more and allowing the collaborative cross-movement work that that we've been doing. And I think that it's it's very easy, doing some of that work myself. It's pretty straightforward, when I'm working with you to talk about, or anybody to talk about intersectionality, because most of us aren't in a single identity. That's just not the reality of how most people are. It's just, and even if someone is, a cisgendered, heterosexual, white male over 50, that doesn't mean he always has all power in every situation. Right? He is likely going to be employed, in which case, because we have to look, obviously, at power relations. I'm eating the mic. We have to look at power relations and how, and how it's both. It's both. We can observe power relations and power negotiations both at the interpersonal level and at the institutional structural level, and so even if people can't structurally have power, they have experienced not having power interpersonally and can then expand that out. And so, when we break it down, I think at least, in a training, it depends on who you're training. But I think it is very possible to break down intersectionality into a pretty I mean, we do it in community organizing all the time. So there's no reason why academia can't do that.
Great. Kate, thank you, Patty. Kate?
I guess the only thing that I would say is that I remember when I was here when Paul Longmore, when this institute was opening, and that was sort of the first time I was exposed to the lens of sort of able, disable, as, you know, through the study of history. And I remember being in high school and learning about sort of race as a lens and being like really impassioned and really indignant and then I learned about gender as a lens and I was really impassioned, I was really indignant, and I was, you know, and then it was just like, wow, I didn't learn about that. And it only happened also because I had him as a professor, and I'm sure there was a lot of people in the graduate school that didn't happen to have him as a professor, and so that may not have ever been a lens. And I just find that with the high school students, they're really ticked off that like it's not taught sooner. They're like, why are we only learning about this now? And it really does beg the question of who gets to tell the story. I mean, for me as a historian, right, who gets to tell the story and what we pick and choose, and what we prioritize for them to learn. And sort of at the end of the day, this is still one of those things where we're like, can we fit it into the curriculum? You know, from the larger narrative. And what the kids are telling us is like, absolutely, you should fit it into the narrative, and why haven't you done it sooner? So it's just it's a lesson that I'm learning every day from them.
Great, so thank you. So in the spirit of revolutionary acts, I'm wondering if I could do something pretty simple and maybe a way to sort of move forward. So how many of you in the room who are activists or educators would love to be connected with teachers that are teaching this history in the classroom? All right, so teachers that are here, how many of you would love to be connected with academics and activists who... So I think we had in terms of the academic sort of hands up, I think there were probably at least 20, and then in terms of teachers, probably at least 12. Thank you for the heads up on that. So one of the things you can do is to seek each other out as we move into the next session of the evening, which will actually be some nutrition. So physical nutrition, food, rather than intellectual nutrition. So with that said, I want to introduce Emily Smith-Badix, who's the Associate Director of the Paul K. Longmore Institute for Disability Studies. She's done a lot of work helping to coordinate all the different pieces of the puzzle, navigating the technology, maintaining human connections, and caring for a little one who we've had an opportunity to see several times, both virtually and in person today. So I just want to hand it over to Emily and say thank you, sort of explicitly, to thank you for your work and making this a great day.
So I promise to keep this brief because I've been intensely dictating time everywhere, so I can't be a hypocrite about the time. Yeah, all of the signs are up here. So just a few takeaways and thank yous. I recently met someone through the Longmore Institute that explained to me that because of their disability, looking back recently in history, nobody would have lived to adulthood. Due to sort of medical advances and biotech advances that they can now live and navigate society. And yet, looking forward, they said that they again saw the disappearance of their impairment and their condition due to efforts to erase and prevent people like them. So I think this illustration speaks to the timeliness of this conference and the topic at hand. You know, eugenics history risks being forgotten in the historical memory at a moment when we need it most to prevent its reemergence. I hope we can leave this conference motivated by the fact that so many people came together to discuss this heavy and complex topic. Again, there was a waiting list to get in. It was so exciting for us organizers to see how immediately receptive people were to this topic. And as it's been said before, a mix of people, educators, scholars, activists, performers. So we hope that this day is the springboard of a conversation because, of course, believe it or not, in one day we didn't solve that whole thing. We heard the ways that these final panelists are working to make change to bring eugenics history out of the shadows and to prevent neo-eugenics from emerging. But we'd love to hear all of your ideas about the ways that we can continue this conversation following today's event. So I ask that just dinner is outside, but you just take a brief moment to grab an index card, jot down an idea. You have any sort of thoughts on what could happen next? You know, how might we continue the conversation? How might we support the development of a network for collaboration? How can we help you in your efforts to make your perspective heard? And you know, I'd say really importantly, how can we promote positive visions of science and biotechnology? You know, our position is so frequently in the negative, what we're against, and we need to shift it so we can make conversations about what are we for. So please write something down and leave it in the center of your table. Also leave the notes that if people have been taking throughout the day in the center of the table, and CGS and Longmore staff will collect all of that. Another sort of, if you didn't take notes, that's fine. I'm already hearing, oh no, we didn't take notes. So I've just heard endless links. You've got to check out this link and read this book. Let's also consolidate those and share those, because so many of us are educators that want to need material or whatever sort of medium we're working in. So I guess I will volunteer. You can send me your links, send me your suggestions, or write them down on the index cards, and we'll make sure that they get out to everyone who is here today, as well as the waiting list people who weren't able to join us. And so some thank yous. Once again, I'd like to thank the College of Liberal and Creative Arts, the College of Education, the College of Ethnic Studies, sponsorship from Professor of History, Trevor Getz, the organizing committee, who I was extremely grateful to get to work with, Alexandra Stern, Milton Reynolds, Rob Wilson, Marcy Darnowski. Thanks to Provost Sue Rosser for her opening comments, and Longmore Institute Director Catherine Kudlick, and to all of our panelists who came from near and far to participate. Thank you to our amazing table facilitators. If we can take a moment to give them a round of applause. Wonderful. Thank you to CGS staff, to Moira with Living Archives, and to Longmore staff who helped us all pull this off. And lastly, thanks to all of you for sticking with us throughout the day. But it's not over. It's not over. We're going to have dinner. We're going to get to continue the conversation. And importantly, I really urge you to all join me for the evening film screening of Fixed, the science fiction of human enhancement. I've seen several cuts of it early on, and I guarantee it is a film you will not want to miss. It really covers so much of what we've been talking about here today in a very provocative and interesting way. So the film screening will not be in this room. We need a change of venue. It's very stuffy in here. So we're going to move to 133 Humanities, and we'll kind of all around 6 o'clock caravan that way, but if you get lost and separated from the caravan, there are instructions for how to find the Humanities building that should have been passed out to you, and if not, they're at that registration table. So we'd like to begin that promptly at 6:30. So one last time, put those notes and send links, and here's to a time when people with disabilities, along with many other marginalized people, don't need to have a conference to talk about their right to exist. So we'll end at that.